economy is stuck in a Labour doom loop. First, they tell us our taxes won't go up. Then they waste tons of money. £10,000 pay rise for train drivers, 30 billion quid extra a year on welfare, the government giving BMWs for anxiety, and billions for Mauritius, migrant welfare, and Miliband's mad plans. To fund this crazy spending, they have to break their promises and raise taxes, and also borrow more. Reeves has hiked borrowing by £200 billion. So what's the result of all this? Fewer jobs, higher inflation, more debt, the wealthy leaving, which all means lower economic growth, which in turn means less tax raised than expected. And when investors and the market see this, they lose confidence in our ability to pay back our debt. And so they demand a higher rate of return on the money they're lending us. And borrowing costs are now at a 30-year high. We're spending more under Reeves on servicing that debt than on our police and our schools combined. After last year's budget, Reeves promised no more taxes. But because of all this, she's going to have to. And it looks like she's going to do it on people's incomes, their pensions, and their homes. And so the tragic cycle begins again. We've got to ditch the doom loop. We've got to ditch Labour.
The political battle over Britain's economic future escalated this week as senior Conservative MP Robert Jenrick delivered a stinging critique of Labour's economic platform, accusing Shadow Chancellor Rachel Reeves of pursuing policies that risk sending the UK economy into a tailspin. In a speech aimed squarely at voters wary of rising taxes and government borrowing, Jenrick painted a grim picture of what he calls a Labour doom loop: higher spending, higher borrowing, weaker growth, and ultimately higher taxes on ordinary households. Jenrick claimed that Reeves' fiscal plans would set off a vicious cycle. He pointed to a £10,000 pay rise for train drivers, an additional £30 billion a year on welfare, and what he described as wasteful or misdirected spending on migrant support. To finance this, he said, Labour had already pushed borrowing up by £200 billion. According to Jenrick, that increase in borrowing has rattled investors and markets, driving up the cost of government debt to a 30-year high. We're spending more on servicing our debt than we are on our police and schools combined, he warned. The implication is stark. As borrowing costs climb and growth slows, the Treasury will struggle to raise enough revenue, forcing further tax rises. The tragic cycle begins again, Jenrick declared. We've got to ditch the doom loop. We've got to ditch Labour. The attack goes to the heart of the economic credibility that Labour has tried to project ahead of the next election. Reeves has repeatedly pledged not to raise taxes on working families and to maintain fiscal discipline. Yet Jenrick argues that Labour's spending promises will leave her with no choice but to raise taxes on incomes, pensions, and even homes. Breaking those pledges, economists remain divided over the claim. Some analysts agree that Britain's high debt levels leave little room for expensive new commitments without risking higher borrowing costs. Others argue that targeted investment in infrastructure and growth sectors could pay off over time, softening the burden on taxpayers. The exchange underscores how deeply economic anxiety is shaping Britain's political debate. After a period of sluggish growth, high inflation, and cost of living pressures, both major parties are eager to present themselves as guardians of fiscal responsibility. Jenrick's rhetoric reflects a wider conservative strategy to portray Labour as fiscally reckless at a time when markets remain wary of government debt. For Reeves and Labour, the challenge is to reassure voters and investors that they can balance ambition with discipline. The clash sets the stage for what may become one of the defining debates of the next general election. Can the UK escape slow growth and high debt without triggering the very doom loop Jenrick warns about?
What do you say on a day like this, on an eve like this, when Starmer's going to introduce this tomorrow?
I honestly think we've got them, Bev. I feel uncharacteristically optimistic about it. I've been, desperately furious about the concept of a digital ID card for a long time. And I've been anxious about the possibility of somebody actually daring to bring one forward, but here it is. And I genuinely think that there's enough awareness, more than enough awareness out there in the general population. I sense that there's going to be mass refusal, mass non-compliance. I think this government has rolled the dice, with instructions from on high. I believe the likes of Keir Starmer and his ilk are just factotums. They've had to roll the dice on this, and it's going to be a disaster for them, and will probably conceivably be what brings them down.
We're going to be, just in a moment, I'm going to talk to Peter Edwards, who's in the studio in London, who doesn't have such a strong opinion on the negatives of this as you might do, and myself as well. So just explain to the absolute layman, because these conversations are going to have to take place now, why this is problematic. And if you can, Neil, do it like in terms of the real practicalities rather than the ideology of it.
It's the way in which it brings everything together. Everything together, all of the information about us, everything from health, everything about your finances, everything, anything that you can think of that's out there in the digital sphere is brought together by this kind of platform. And everything can be used in real time to make judgments about you, about what you propose to do. It can reference things that you've said in the past, done in the past. It can use anything at all that's on your record. It can relate to protests maybe that you've attended, to things that you've said, to posts that you've made on social media, to your financial status. And in real time, decisions can be made about whether or not you get permission to do whatever it is that you want to do next. Put fuel in your car, buy a plane ticket, buy a steak in a supermarket, buy a bottle of wine, whatever it is that you want to do, a decision can be made in advance. Because what is happening here with digital ID is effectively you are being replaced with an avatar of yourself. If you imagine one of those little pieces that you move about on a Monopoly board that sort of represents you on the board, well, they have you in that digital ID, and they can decide whether or not you get to move on the board. And your hands are effectively tied behind your back. Anybody that submits to this, anybody that accepts a digital ID is slapping handcuffs around their own wrists. It's the end of freedom, it's the end of choice, it's the worst possible decision that any freedom-loving person could possibly make. But as I say, I was pessimistic about it for a while, I'm not anymore. We've got them on this. We have them surrounded. Their arguments don't stack up. None of the reasons that they've put forward for doing this make any kind of sense. The very idea that this is going to tackle the people arriving by boats on the shores of the British Isles is absolute nonsense. It was never supposed to do that. The appetite, the desire to bring forward the digital ID was there years ago. And it was understood by the people that wanted to bring it forward that the British people would not accept it. So problems had to be fomented to make people desperate to accept this as a solution. Hence the opening up of the borders and the mass immigration onto these shores that has stoked division, has stoked fear, and the hope has been that people would accept the digital ID as this solution to the problem. But it's entirely bogus. Yeah. All people have to do is not comply, and this thing falls flat on its face. And I am convinced that that is what's going to happen.